Welcome back to the Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrand. His name, of course, is the one, the only Dan Rubenstein, and this is our college football playoff national championship stunt preview.
Where am I?
Episode.
What is this place, Ty? This is so weird.
That's right. Dan is here in the flesh. You don't want to stay here, do you?
No, it's a great basement. It's a great house. It's a great time. But last year we went out and got tacos and talked about the game. This is a home and home. I think
we need to hit the town.
I think we need to get out and see and talk and have opinions about Michigan, Washington.
Let's go right now. So we're on the road now.
Yeah.
We made various pizza stops in Philly. I guess it's time to get down to this game.
And a cheesesteak. Yeah, pizza and a cheesesteak. I love the matchup. I love the story surrounding the game. I love the novelty of two teams that haven't been in this game in quite some time, but as programs have been in huge games in huge spots, like throughout history. I think the kind of interesting thing is like the path both of these teams took, because, you know, the sort of narrative was Washington is incredible in year one with Kalen DeBoer. They lose last year to UCLA in LA, but beat Oregon, win their bowl game last year against Texas, come in with a ton of hype, fulfill the hype, beat Oregon twice in like close, interesting back and forth matchups, and are sort of doubted along the way. They're a 9-point dog to Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. They're a dog against Texas, and now they're a dog against Michigan, and they just keep winning.
No.
And so maybe tough for me when I'm wearing my Oregon hat, but like, how do you not respect what they've done? Like, on a certain level, I've been the, like, Jesse from Breaking Bad. Like, how do they keep getting away with this? Right? Where, like, Quinn Ewers has the opportunity. Oregon's had those opportunities. Washington State, Oregon State. They've won however many games by single digits, by touchdown or fewer, and they pull them out. They just keep pulling them out.
No. I'm infatuated with the Harbaugh storyline right now.
Yeah, of course.
It might be the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
But, you know, here's a guy who was almost fired a couple years ago, made a very concerted effort to change things in a way that could at a minimum beat Ohio State.
Yeah.
Has gone on to do that now 3 years running. Obviously has a lot of experience as a coach in some big high leverage situations. He's been in the playoff a couple times now, played in coached in a Super Bowl. Maybe he will again at some point in the future, which is sort of its own storyline to begin with.
Yeah.
I'm just really curious to see how this thing shakes out for him, and 20 years down the line, what the legacy of Jim Harbaugh is. Like, we're kind of watching this in slow motion as he writes his story, but it's not often that you've got a guy who has coached at a really high level, both in college and in the NFL. And so this would be another one of those things for him that he could put on the resume, that when people talk about some of the greatest coaches we've seen on the college side, maybe he doesn't have quite the longevity in college as somebody like a Saban, but he's obviously coaching at a really high level right now.
I mean, between Stanford and Michigan,
yeah, I mean,
he is a college coach and NFL coach, but this is not like a stop.
It's not a stop. And I just think, I don't know, like you and I talked about this before, it does feel like a lot of arrows have been pointing to this season.
Yeah, of course.
For Michigan, whether with the schedule, whether with the returning like veteran leadership that they had. They're going to have a lot of guys drafted off of this team. On top of it all, you've got that added Connor Stallions layer that maybe weirdly built some culture on the team, kind of worked for them more than it did against them, at least inside of that locker room. that to me is really the most fascinating aspect of the matchup. It is also a very interesting contrast of two styles.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan very much wants to play that bully ball. They're very, very talented. We can talk about it more when we get into the Michigan offense versus the Washington defense.
Yeah.
They're talented in how they use their linemen, how they, I think, show patience when they're putting together a game plan. Whereas Washington, not to say they don't do those things as well, they also have a good line. They also are very skilled in putting together a game plan. But they have the Michael Penix factor that, frankly, nobody else in the playoff had the Michael Penix factor.
Right.
It's just two very interesting, contrasting styles, not just with Penix, but with the wide receiving core, combined with the way that Michigan likes to play as a whole. It's a really interesting way for the season to close out.
Let's go get Yaakov. You know it's always been the best. Let's go get Yaakov. For quality that beats the rest.
You want to talk Washington?
I would love to talk Washington. We're at a dog place, talking some dogs.
Washington, a 4.5 point underdog ahead of this national championship game, has sort of been the, as we've lovingly referred to them on our show, the TCU of 2023, in that they've put in a lot of close games. They've got an electric offense. Defense may be a little bit questionable, but they've been clutch. They've been in clutch situations all year, and they've found a way to pull through.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the Washington offense as compared to the Michigan defense, how does that matchup look to you on paper, on the video that you've seen?
Yeah. It's something's got to give. It's right, the unstoppable force against the immovable object. And if you start with the Washington offense, they've played good defenses. I think the best defenses that they've played have been the last two. Oregon was missing a corner or two, and one of their defensive linemen. Doesn't matter. It's next man up. Texas is, the strength of the Texas defense was their defensive line, and they got to Penix. They didn't tackle him. He evaded, but he had to make plays because the inside of the Texas defensive line was able to make plays against the offensive line in front of it. And at this point, he's been tested by good defenses. In the Pac-12, there were various decent defenses. And Michigan, on the Michigan side, they haven't seen a quarterback like Michael Penix, but basically nobody has, other than teams who've played Michael Penix. So Michigan finished their season playing an intriguing talent in Jalen Milroe, Kyle McCord, Deacon Hill, and Talia, and Drew Aller. They have not seen somebody that is this dynamic, this fearless downfield, this decisive downfield as Michael Penix. So you say, well, Michigan has these terrific corners and Wallace and Sainristil, obviously Will Johnson, All-American, high first-round talent. They are tasked with 3 standout NFL caliber receivers.
Right.
And generally speaking, in this type of game, when you have those types of options, like, it's just sort of hat on hat with great players on Michigan's side, great players on Washington's side. And the big X factor is going to be Rome Odunze, because he can bully anybody. He is so physical, up in the air, running routes, boxing dudes out, the strong hands, whatever, that Will Johnson can make a perfect play on the ball, on the pass. His coverage can be perfect if that's the matchup, Will Johnson, Rome Odunze, and it won't matter. We've seen that week in, week out with good corners on Rome Odunze. And so the difference to me is going to be, and we mentioned this sort of in the lead up to this, is Michael Penix, the onus is going to be on him being full on excellent.
Right.
And I think they can win if he's merely really good, but that will also mean the running game has to be there. That's also going to mean the defense is going to have to get key stops or a turnover, or sort of sniff out a lot of what Michigan's trying to do early, and Michigan can adjust. And if all things are equal, then yeah, I think Michael Penix has to be full on excellent like he was against Texas. And the receiver's going to have to come down with those 50-50 balls, the sideline stuff, the deep corner routes, the over-the-middle stuff deep to Rome Odunze that he was able to haul in. And Michael Penix is a gamer. And you can look at the sort of down moments he had during, the middle of the season, whether it was against Arizona State, whether it was some bad conditions against Washington State or Oregon State. We're playing indoors, NRG Stadium in Houston. Conditions will be perfect. Health, other than Dylan Johnson, which is also something we should talk about, is largely good. Offensive line's in good shape. Joe Mora winning offensive line did not allow Michael Penix to be pressured. And Michigan's defensive line will pressure him, but strictly speaking on this matchup of when Washington has the ball, it's going to be starting out quickly for Washington. It's going to be if Michigan is dropping dudes into coverage, right? If they're playing games up front and dropping, an edge guy into the flat and they're only rushing 3, it's will Washington be cognizant enough to start handing the ball off to whoever, if it's Dylan Johnson, if it's somebody else, because that was the sort of difference in those Oregon games, especially the Pac-12 championship game, leaning on the rushing attack when it was there. And it's going to be when there are those opportunities downfield. If Michigan is playing in a too high shell, it's do you have the right play call, or is Penix adjusting something to have a receiver running safety out of a play? And it's when you do have the opportunity, if there's a one high dude, when you do have the opportunity, if you're getting blitzed and the hot guy is open, is Washington nailing 9 of 10 of those opportunities like they seem to do at times against Texas.
It did seem like in the Texas game that Michael Penix was nearly perfect.
Yeah.
And that's part of his ethos at this point. He's definitely a big game quarterback, and he's made some really big plays throughout the course of his career. Even if it's not in a quote-unquote big game, he's just that kind of guy. It's hard to replicate that in high-pressure situations. Now, his track record would indicate that he's up for the challenge and that he will come through in a really big way. I don't know if they've played a defense quite the level of Michigan, though.
No.
And what concerns me looking at that particular matchup is what we saw in the Alabama game. Michigan was able to control that point of attack. They were able to get pressure on Jalen Milroe. They had 5 sacks in the first half alone. They finished with 6 in the game. If you're able to get in Michael Penix's face, so much of what he does is communicate with his receivers, have that chemistry with his receivers, and put the ball to a spot on time because of that timing that they've developed over 2 seasons now.
Yeah.
If Michigan can upset that balance, I want to see what version of Michael Penix we get. He still may be very good.
Yeah.
And he was in New York for a reason.
Yep.
I'm just curious to see if that timing's upset, if the Washington offense is out of rhythm at all. You could probably speak better than I to what happened in those Oregon games. Mm-hmm. My hunch is that Oregon tried to do a lot of the same stuff, given some of their strength up front.
Yeah.
And Michael Penix was able to still win those games.
Yeah.
So maybe it will be a similar situation where they just have to overcome some of the matchup disadvantages. I do think Michigan's got the advantage along the defensive line. But the timing factor for me is, I think, a big concern.
Yeah. It's really going to come down to, just in terms of Washington and opportunities, is you can't give Washington a crease. You can't give Washington a little window. And if you look at the Oregon matchups, winnable games for Oregon, but ultimately, Washington is able to make the plays more often when it counts. It's Oregon has the opportunities to win, Washington does the winning. And what Oregon was able to do successfully against Michael Penix, especially in that first matchup, when their starting corners were on the field, they started pressing them. And it's not like the Washington guys were stuffed. It's not like the Washington guys were held down. They started getting physical with them to limit the rhythm, right? That there's a certain rhythm to Michael Penix and going downfield and finding his guys. And if you delay that rhythm, if you stutter it a little bit, then he's off a little bit. And so when he should be releasing it, he's waiting an extra beat to release it. And maybe that's when balls sail, right? That's what Oregon was able to do successfully. And if you are pressing those receivers, and I think Michigan has terrific corners and terrific DBs, are they built to sort of hand fight with Rome Odunze at the line of scrimmage and win and slow him down? That's a huge question to me. Like Mike Sainristil, for instance, all he does is make plays. All he is ever doubted that he's too small, and all he ever does is make plays. We saw the huge one against Ohio State last year. But if he is tasked with getting dirty with Ja'lynn Polk or with Jalen McMillan, big physical dudes, then what? And made plays against big physical dudes against Ohio State. And so if you can get Michael Penix just thinking a touch longer than usual.
Yeah.
And also Oregon had the defensive lineman, when he's thinking more, to get in his face. You saw they hit Michael Penix. Hard to do with this offensive line. Oregon was able to do that in a way not a lot of teams were. So that was that first matchup, a winnable matchup. Washington wins. Second one, a winnable matchup. Washington wins because they don't blink. They don't blink late in these games.
Yeah.
Michigan didn't blink against Alabama. And so to me, the key is going to be Michigan dudes up front along this defensive line. Experienced guys, Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins, all these dudes winning the one-on-one matchups against the Washington offensive line. Easier said than done. If they can do that, they're getting him off of his spot. Does that guarantee success? No, it does not.
No.
But it's a defensive line that can do it. Does Washington doesn't do much over the middle. Are they going to start picking on some Michigan linebackers who are very good, but I don't think the strongest part of this defense? Washington doesn't really count on a dynamic tight end in the way that some teams do down the field. Like Westover is good, but he seems to be much more of a release, a safety valve type thing in this offense, and the receivers are the stars, rightfully so. So that to me is going to be huge. It's what does Michigan decide to take away? If I were Michigan, and I was talking with our friend Jeff about this, Schwartz, does Michigan sort of concede the field between the 20s and say, you know what, we're not going to take a lot of chances. We're going to keep too high in the way that Texas largely did. And we're just going to put everything we have into a shorter, shrunken field. And Michigan I don't think Washington can field goal their way to a win against Michigan.
No.
So it's going to come down to those on the Michigan 18, 3rd and 2s, 3rd and 6s. Where's Washington's head? Where's Kalen DeBoer's head? And then in the red zone, when does Kalen DeBoer and when Ryan Grubb, offensive coordinator, when on 4th and 3 from the Michigan 18, when are they saying, F it, we've got to play for this. We have a play for this moment. When are we ever going to have this again? That to me is going to be enormous.
Yeah, I think this is a Michigan defense, as I told you before, has been engineered almost from the ground up to stop this kind of offense. Mm-hmm. They have not faced a whole lot of it this season, but they had in previous seasons. Remember, they were trying to beat Ohio State before they were trying to get to a title.
Yep.
First things first, you got to beat your biggest rival. And so I don't think that those plans fell by the wayside. I think this is a defensive unit that over the course of time, they are a veteran team. They have seen this style of offense before. They may not have seen a quarterback quite as accurate with back shoulder throws as somebody like a Michael Penix. But I think generally, this is not a matchup that is above their pay grade. I think they can handle this. I am very curious to see if they bring more heat, and they do blitz a lot more than a team like a Texas. Is Michael Penix able to continue throwing those back shoulder throws?
Right.
With the same level of effectiveness that we saw the rest of the way this season, certainly in that playoff game. I don't know if you can back shoulder fade your way to a national championship. I'm skeptical that he will have the same level of success against Michigan that he has against other teams on the schedule. That said, I feel like we've said that every week.
Totally true. Yeah.
So for me, that's the thing. I want to see if Michigan is owning the line of scrimmage the way they did against Alabama. And if so, how does that upset the rhythm of Penix and the receiving core?
Well, yes and no, because Michigan, I don't know what Jace McClellan's final number was, but at least deep into that, he was averaging 6-7 yards a carry against this Michigan front. And Michigan, wisely, is like, what are we going to allow? What are we going to focus on? And they were like, we are not going to get beat deep by Jermaine Burton, Isaiah Bond, right? That opens up everything. And they knew that the Alabama passing game wasn't built on multiple levels.
They knew it. They knew it, and they were ready for the deep shots that Milroe was trying to take. I mean, at the end of the day, watching that game unfold, final minutes, it was apparent that the only real out pitch that Alabama had was letting Jalen Milroe run it.
Yeah.
They were finding ways to get him in space to make him run it, but it's not like the passing game was working all that well. And late in the game, they weren't really even trying to run it with others. It was all Milroe. And Michigan figured that out. Michigan, I think, was just the more solid team from top to bottom. I said it on our recap show. Their defense felt like it had a really good handle on everything that Alabama wanted to do.
Yeah.
Now, they were trailing late in that game.
Yeah.
But it felt to me like Alabama was holding on by a thread, and they had that one thing that they knew was working that they kept trying to do. It worked pretty much, the entire fourth quarter with the exception of that last series in overtime. So I'm fascinated by that matchup in the trenches. I think Washington's got a great offensive line. That's part of why they're here. But I do think Michigan and its front, it is a different challenge than what we saw from Texas. And I think they're going to get the better of Washington.
Yeah, I think the big thing will be interesting to see what Washington chooses to pick on, especially in the run game, where Texas was just going to stuff everything inside. You were not going to be able to run between the tackles against Texas. And, Dylan Johnson going late is one thing, and we'll see, even if he's playing in this game, he's not going to be 100% likely. It's going to be interesting to see if Washington chooses to use more of its slot-type receivers in the run game and sort of go for the perimeter, which I actually kind of think is a bad idea against a defense this fast and this disciplined and this, honestly, old. Like, I think Michigan's going to be able to snuff out some things and, into your Colin or Stallions jokes about knowing what's coming here. But, I think trying to go sideline to sideline is a bad idea against this Michigan defense. So I think you have to have a little bit of faith in saying, okay, we're going to pick our spots. Maybe we'll run a little bit early in hopes that, we get, some 6-7 yarders and try going play action from there. And they have a great offensive line to run behind, but it's largely an offensive line that's best at protecting Michael Penix more so than road grading.
So let me ask you this in conclusion as we look at this side of the matchup.
Yeah.
Washington offense, Michigan defense, if you're giving an advantage, blanket advantage to one side versus the other, who do you favor?
The Washington offense, and just barely because of the Michigan defense is great. It's excellent. But I tend to give the advantage in these spots, in these moments, and I know Ohio State had the receiving core, although I don't think Ohio State had the receiving core it has had lately. It has the talent with Marvin Harrison Jr., as good as any receiver, if not better than any receiver in the country. But from there, and maybe it was a Kyle McCord thing, there is something about a pinpoint quarterback with big physical receivers that there's just no accounting for, that I'm positive Michigan's corners will play balls perfectly, and there will be moments where it doesn't matter.
It still won't matter.
It doesn't matter. And so it's a harder ask. It's a higher degree of difficulty. I'm going to give the edge to Washington's offense just because they've done it so often and so consistently, whereas I think Michigan's defense is going to be very, very good against Washington. But if you're talking to me about, am I more scared about winning against Michigan's defense or winning against Washington's receivers and Penix? I think that's the higher level thing. The fact that he's, 24? He's an adult. We said this after the game. He's an NFL
He's a grown-ass man.
He's a grown man playing quarterback. And look, you have older guys, especially on the front for the Michigan defense. But I'm just going to go with the sort of unguardable element of the best of Washington's offense.
Okay.
We want to remind you that with the score tied at 3-3,
today's telecast of Lehigh Lafayette football
is made possible by an underwriting.
All right, Ty, and now with a full stomach and full heart and full brain.
Yeah.
From Yakos to the 50-yard line. Look, if we're talking about the big time, we came to the biggest time. That's the Patriot League.
Right.
And we're on the 50-yard line of the Lehigh Mountain Hawks Engineers.
That's right.
To talk the other side of things. And
the other side of things.
That's when Michigan has the ball. And as far as I can tell, this is probably what decides the game. This is Michigan with the ball, Washington's defense, the Washington defense being the obvious big question mark, and Michigan's offense, especially you look at how they were, maybe how they weren't, were down the stretch. Perhaps a big question mark. And how do you see this? What is ringing in your ears when you think about this side of the game?
Well, you're right. I mean, now we're on the other side of the mountain.
That's true.
Right? We've come to Goodman Stadium to
What's that mountain called?
This is South Mountain back here.
Got it.
And the fine folks at Lehigh have allowed us on the 50-yard line of Goodman Stadium for this very special report.
It's not warm. It's not tropical today if you're watching. Yeah.
It's cold. It is a workmanlike effort from you and I. And in many respects, that feels like it is Michigan's MO. Michigan's offense, I think, works on 3 levels and in a very specific order.
Okay.
The first is their offensive line. Everything is driven off of that offensive line. After that, the running game. The running game, a direct result of athletic linemen who they put into all sorts of concepts, power, counters, duos, you name it. They're very, very good at blocking like a big gap running scheme.
Right.
And then off of that is the third thing that works really well for Michigan, and that is the play action pass. Because the first two are so effective, the passing game can be effective when they want to use it. They don't always need to, and I think a big advantage for Michigan going into this game is that whereas Texas might have been a little bit impatient with trying to do things a little bit more creative in the passing game, did not exhibit any kind of commitment to the run like you and I were screaming when we were on
when they
the
did
stream.
run, it went well against
It went
Washington's-
extremely well,
yes.
and it felt like they should continue to do that.
Yeah.
They didn't. And I don't know if that's because of impatience or because they thought they saw a matchup in the passing game or what. Michigan does not have that level of impatience. If Michigan sees that the way to win this game is to run it 65 times,
Right.
I think they've already proven that they're willing to do that. The Penn State game is a great example. J.J. McCarthy might have been a little nicked up. J.J. McCarthy threw the ball 8 times in that Penn State victory earlier this season. So whereas I think Texas wanted to veer away, wanted to be a little bit more creative in their schemes, I don't think Michigan is as prone to overthinking it. And so for me, that is a huge advantage because we saw what we saw
Right.
in that first playoff semifinal matchup with Washington and Texas. This is not a Washington front seven that, to me, profiles as a particular strength in this football game. They're 62nd nationally in terms of points per drive. I think they've got pretty good strength in the secondary that they've shown, and that comes out in some of the havoc stats and some of those advanced numbers.
You
that
saw
you and I
Elijah
like.
Jackson make the play at the end of the game.
Totally. I mean, that stuff shows up on paper. But I think by and large, you look at this Washington front and you say, okay, you can push them around. You say they don't particularly blitz a whole lot.
Yep.
And then on top of it all, whether they're blitzing or not, they generate virtually no pressure. And so I think it really is Michigan's game to win in the trenches. When they have the football, if they want to drop back and hand the ball off 50 times to Blake Corum or some combination of running backs, it is there for them if they want that style of football. And we don't really have any body of work to prove otherwise. This has been who Michigan's been for the last couple seasons.
Right.
They want to play that bully ball, and I think everything's been pointed in this direction for some time. This is a really good matchup for them when they've got the football. And because they are so athletic with their linemen, getting them into like these advantageous matchups, it gives you the feeling as the home viewer like they're never going to get off the field. Michigan is very content to just drain the clock.
Right.
If they have to. They don't care if they score 30 points. It's about winning. It's not about stats. And so that in this matchup in particular, especially when we just got done talking about Michael Penix and how quick strike of an offense that can be with his precision passing, just keep him off the field, dog. Keep him off the field.
Right.
Run your game. I think that's good enough for Michigan to score their points and win.
Okay, can I offer a counterpoint? My counterpoint is I don't believe – so, okay, with Texas, the Washington defense had to respect the run and pass. Okay? So you have Quinn Ewers, Xavier Worthy, JT Sanders, all these guys. With Oregon, you have to respect the run and pass. And Washington actually did a really nice job taking away Oregon on the ground. A really successful, if not like one of the 3 most successful rushing attacks in the sport in the Pac-12 championship game. And Oregon, sort of similarly to Washington, came out trying to throw, which I thought was a better sort of similar to Texas, to come out and throw against Washington, which is sort of foolhardy. But I think Washington in this specific matchup, much like Alabama did, somewhat successfully, not all the time, might be savvy enough to say, just beat us, J.J. McCarthy then. Here's 8 guys in the box. Do something about it, right?
Well, and I think that underscores my main concern for the Michigan offense going into this game. Because of the Penix factor, and because we know even if all things are pointed against him, he still can put the ball where it needs to go.
Right.
If this Michigan offense falls down 14 points third quarter, what does it look like? What does it look like? We saw them down 7, and we saw J.J. McCarthy lead them on a game-tying drive. We know that they've got that capability.
Sure.
But still, that was more of a systematic, longer 8-play drive. To march down the field over 3 minutes, whatever it was, to tie the game at 20, go into overtime. But if they're down by a more substantial double-digit margin later in the game, I'm curious as to what this version of the Michigan offense looks like. I think it is highly unlikely that it comes to that. Because of the way that Michigan plays on defense, I don't expect that this is going to be a game where they're going to be down by any great margin, maybe a field goal, maybe a touchdown.
Right.
I think this will be close, even if they're losing.
Yeah.
But I do worry about what does the quick strike Michigan come from behind offense look like if they need to find it, because I don't think that's particularly their
which
strength.
Texas had that ability, right? Falling behind, Texas had the ability to come back. We saw it at the end of the game that the Washington defense, while improved over the course of the season, that improves over the course of a game. They're very good at making adjustments. Is not outstanding, is not the best unit in this game, certainly. I wonder, especially within the context of Michigan's season, going into that Penn State game where they didn't throw it. That's the Sharon Moore game, his first, taking over with minutes before kickoff. Coming into that game, J.J. McCarthy was seen as a Heisman caliber quarterback. He had thrown for a ton. He was legitimately dangerous. This offense was, I think, the most efficient scoring offense in America because of its balance. It hasn't been that way since. J.J. McCarthy made plays against Ohio State. Like I'll go back to all the way back to the Big Ten championship game. Didn't lead them down the field. Now, Iowa's defense, much more dangerous than Washington's defense, but they didn't have touchdown drives in that game. And so that's the worry to me, that you can force not Michigan to be, a one-trick pony, but there is that idea that Michigan has to win in a very specific way, and they can win in a couple of different ways overall because of their defense. But if this becomes a track meet, if this becomes like, yeah, we'll put Roman Wilson on an island, we'll put Cornelius Johnson on an island, beat us like that and see if it works out, that there is that challenge involved, I think, with Michigan having the ball.
Well, so you're right. I mean, they win in a very specific way.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen a whole lot in the way of opposition be able to really put them in a box where they have to. And I think that is in large part because their defense has not allowed any opposing offenses to put them in a box. The Penn State game is a great example. Penn State couldn't really get much going. The Ohio State game, Ohio State did a better offense, but it never felt to me as if they were truly challenging the Michigan defense in a way that put pressure on the Michigan offense.
Yeah.
So if anybody offensively can put pressure on the defense and force a response from the offense, I suppose Washington's a good candidate for that. But for me personally, I think the advantage that Michigan has on both sides of this one in the trenches is what is going to spring them to victory.
You think Michigan has a definitive advantage, their defensive line against Washington's offensive line?
I wouldn't call it definitive.
Okay.
I don't think it's definitive because I think Washington's got a really, really good offensive front. But I think what Michigan has done that could ask questions of the Washington offense that we haven't seen in a bit. They can blitz. They can generate pressure.
Sure.
They can get in Michael Penix's face. And as we said when you talk about the Washington offense, if you can upset his rhythm, Penix's rhythm, what style of game do we see from the Huskies?
Yeah.
So I like that matchup for them, even if it's not quite as definitive. I really like the matchup on the offensive side of things for Michigan with their line going up against the Washington front. This is a Washington front that, again, on paper and maybe in practice profiles as a specific matchup that Michigan can take advantage of. So I really like Blake Corum. I really like whoever Michigan wants to trot out there to run. Now, I do think that, to your point, if Washington finds a way to make Michigan reverse engineer that formula, right, where they're suddenly a pass-first team and they don't have whatever balance they're comfortable with, that's when things could get interesting. But I only think that happens if Michigan falls down, say, 2 scores later in the game.
Okay.
And that just does not seem likely to me.
So the interesting thing to me, too, about this year's Michigan offense is the rushing attack. The line has been very good. The rushing attack has been good. It hasn't been smothering.
No.
How many times have we talked about or heard anybody talk about Donovan Edwards this year?
No.
Right? Like, we kind of came to expect a 1-2 punch of Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, right? Like more all-purposey Donovan Edwards, more big play, home run hitter. Blake Corum is just like the dependable excellence at running back, but he's not necessarily like the huge receiving threat, even though he does have that touchdown through the air in the red zone against Alabama. That Donovan Edwards is that game breaker. We saw it last year against Ohio State. We saw it in the playoff. And it just hasn't been as automatic feeling this year for Michigan on offense, that like they can just push teams around. You know, it hasn't been like the Hassan Haskins Ohio State game type stuff.
No, it hasn't.
And so that, to me, it's not a concern. There's a reason they're 14-0, right? winners win on both sides of this, right? They're closing out games, they're clutch, they make plays late, they make plays in high leverage moments. But I'm not fully there on this level. Now, it's the Washington defense, so that's at least nicer than having to face Penn State, Ohio State, Iowa, guys like that. The Texas defense, obviously they're not playing Texas, the Alabama defense. But that to me is somewhat of like something to note, that they haven't been overwhelming on the ground this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think on a personal level, just as a fan, I'm sure Michigan would be content to just play that style of football.
Right.
Wear Washington down, win the game, 21-18. That would be perfectly fine by them.
Yeah.
On a personal level, I would like to see J.J. McCarthy air it out a little bit more.
Would love that.
I think he's got it in him.
Yeah.
I don't know if we feel as comfortable with the – actually, I know we don't.
Yeah.
Michigan wide receiving core as we do the Washington one. It's two different beasts altogether. But I think we saw in a couple key moments in the semifinal matchup, J.J. McCarthy on that quarterback throwback, throwing off his back foot, hitting a guy open. He can still make plays. He is just not the focal point of this offense the way they've engineered it. And I think it would be a great story for him to be able to have that moment. I don't know if he will. I don't know if he will have to. I believe he is good enough for it. I think whatever he decides he wants to go pro, he's a borderline first-round pick. But in this game specifically, it starts with the run. Whatever pass they can get off of that run, I think, is the key to their victory in this one.
I should say, and just because we haven't mentioned his name really, is I think Sharon Moore has been a really savvy offensive coordinator this year. And I've talked about, feeling like he didn't trust J.J. McCarthy in that Penn State game, and maybe it was offensive line injury, maybe it was J.J. McCarthy's own injury, only throwing it 8 times. But you saw the plays that they were able to execute against Alabama in those big moments, the big drive late. Like, I thought he did a really nice job putting this offense in a position to keep drives going, score points in the red zone. Like, he has turned into a legitimately very, very good offensive coordinator.
He's a very, very good offensive coordinator, and he is very, very good at running this system, and it's because of the line. He's got really good linemen who he can move around. They know each other well. It is a veteran team with a lot of leadership, and that timing is something that only comes through repetition. And so whether, again, it's the power, the counter, the do, or whatever concepts you can Google, Michigan is very good at running a few simple concepts, adding wrinkles to make them less recognizable.
Yeah.
And dominating in the trenches. They've got the backs to do it. They've got the quarterback to do it if you need to play the pass off the run. And I think in a matchup like this, it is strongly in their favor.
Should also point out, just because this is the reality when Michigan has the ball, the Washington defense has playmakers. I don't think they're as deep. I don't think they're star power in the way that we've seen from the Texas defense, the Alabama defense. But I think very quietly, especially as they've gotten healthier over the course of the season, especially at linebacker, like, these guys have gotten better sideline to sideline. I don't love the inside of this Washington line, but, like, I like the edge a lot. I like the secondary a good deal, especially Jabbar Muhammad. Like, I think they've got guys. Like, I think we might be glossing a little bit too much because, look, if Washington's defense was legitimately a concern, was legitimately holding them back,
they would have lost to Oregon twice. They might have lost to others.
They wouldn't. They just
in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
And so, I'm doing that Washington defense a bit of a disservice. Yeah. I'll fully acknowledge that. On paper, does not necessarily pair up with what you see when you watch the videos, right? And I go back to the first Oregon game as a classic example. They come up big in a very, very key situation. It doesn't really come out on paper. On paper, they profile as a terrible red zone defense.
Yeah.
As a defense that if you just looked at the numbers, you'd say, this is a huge gaping hole, especially in a game of this magnitude.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm not saying that. I think Michigan is just so good that's why there's an advantage for the Wolverines. But Washington, at least on the back half of that defense, has shown the ability to make plays, has shown the ability to change the game. And so if it comes down to that on the Michigan side where they actually have to go out there and throw the ball 25 times, that's where I think we'll see a little bit more of that.
Sure. I think that's all reasonable. Yeah, and it's interesting that just when I talk about star power with Washington, it's not a negative. We just have watched this game with Isaiah Simmons and Malachi Starks and Quinnen Williams and like guys who are like, oh my God, this dude is such like an undeniable, unstoppable problem. And Michigan has a couple of dudes like that, especially in the secondary and on the defensive line. Washington has a corner who's like that. They've got an edge who's like that in Braylon Trice. And the rest of the guys, they're not Jags. They're not just guys, but they're good. It's just taking over a game.
Yeah.
That to me is if there's any bit of concern with me with this Washington defense is like, this is big moments mean big time players, and where is like that true big time guy on the Washington defense?
Jabbar Muhammad might be one of the better
Definitely
shutdown cornerbacks in college, or shutdown defensive backs in college football.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter in a game like this. With the way that Michigan wants to play,
True.
They might be able to scheme him out of the game altogether.
Right.
So,
and if he's just on an island with Roman Wilson and Roman Wilson isn't a factor, so be it.
yeah.
More of what you want to see is on Service Electric Cable TV.
All right, Dan, we are back here.
We are.
We saw the sights, we heard the sounds, we ate the calories.
Yeah.
Now it's time to get down to the nitty gritty.
Oh, man. We got to make a pick. Yes?
Who are we picking in this football game? Why are we picking them in this football game after all the big picture and specific unit analysis that we did over the last hour or so? Where are you at here? Michigan -4.5 is the point spread going into this game. 55.5 appears to be generally the over-under.
Like
that may
30-25, somewhere in there. Yeah.
that may shift a little bit before kickoff, but by and large, that's the style of game that Vegas thinks we're going to get. Where are you at?
I went back and forth a number of times. There's every cliche, every single one of my Dan weird nicknames or phrases comes into play here, right? Winter Wonders comes into play. Defense wins championships comes into play. Luck running out comes into play for maybe both of these teams, right? That holding on by a razor's edge last week in wins over Alabama and Texas. I'm going to pick Washington. Pick Washington. And Washington is my Jesse Pinkman, he can't keep getting away with this kind of pick. I said before the Texas game, I was sick of picking against Washington. I'm still sick of picking against Washington. I'm not going to sit on the fence. I'm not going to, be a fence-sitting grease pig type person where I say, well, I could see Michigan winning. Of course I could see Michigan winning. You need to make a pick. So I'm going to say it with my chest. I think Washington, I'm almost positive Washington has the better quarterback. They have the better set of receivers. I think their offensive line, if it's not clearly better, it's comparable or slightly better or the similar quality to Michigan's. And who has better experience in this spot losing than Super Bowl runner-up Jim Harbaugh?
Oh, wow.
No, okay, that was unfair. There is just something to me about offensive electricity, defensive improvement. I know it's very easy to say defense wins championships and to not overthink it, but I've watched a lot of Washington football. Anytime it seems that they're ready to be counted out, something happens. Not luck, but they pull it out. And so I'm going with they're just going to keep getting away with it, Ty. They just are. Somehow, some way, they're going to keep getting away with it.
What's your final score?
I'm going to say 33-27 Washington.
Wow. What a win that would be.
And look,
for Kalen DeBoer.
Is this a reverse jinx from an Oregon fan? You're going to have to go back and rewind and do some sort of diagnosis of my tone to truly figure it out. But right now, that's the trust I have. Now, this is, I'm sure, is part of what you're going to lay in front of everybody. The obvious, if a team gets blown out, who is it? It's probably Washington. And I'm going against that logic. And I hate it. Yep. But I'm not going to say I think I could see. Everybody could see either one of these teams winning. So my pick is with Washington. I'm standing there. I'm standing here picking the Huskies, and I've made peace with it.
I'm going Michigan.
Okay.
I went against Michigan.
I don't think you're legally allowed to go back on your pick.
It's my damn show.
I know.
I can do whatever I want. Look, I was high on Michigan at the start of the year, and I went against Michigan in my darkest hour.
Yeah.
And picked Alabama because of a very specific matchup. I think in retrospect, Michigan acquitted itself actually quite well. Michigan needed a bit of a comeback in order to get into overtime and win that game. But if you watch the game, all 60 minutes of it, all 60 minutes and change of it, yeah, it felt like they were the better team to me. It felt like Alabama was hanging on a bit by a thread, hoping Jalen Milroe could pull out another play. In the end, maybe not the worst play call in retrospect, but didn't work. Michigan wins. They go to the title game. I feel like because of circumstances, it's been really easy to root against Michigan or invent ways in which they won't win, right? They have been up against this narrative surrounding the program all season long. And whether it was the beginning of the season with Jim Harbaugh and the voluntary suspension or the mandatory suspension at the end of the year, this is a team that's battle tested in a very, very different way.
Yeah,
They've got
you could say that. Yeah.
They've got the veteran leadership. They obviously won all the games on their schedule. The combination of the defense and what I think they can do up front, specifically against Washington, changing the rhythm for Michael Penix, with what I know they can do on offense, which they've done to everybody on offense, which is bully them and not allow anyone to get like enough breathing room that they feel comfortable against this team. I feel very confident that Michigan's going to win this football game. So I am going to go back to where I was all the way back yesteryear, July 2023. I think this is Michigan's year. I think everything is pointed to this moment, and I'm not going to make the same mistake twice.
Okay.
So my pick in this game
score
is Michigan 34, Washington 27.
Oh, so almost identical, but in the other direction. I had 33-27. Do you believe in the forces of the occult? Do you believe in the universe? Do you believe in somebody is not going to let Michigan win because of the allegations, because, growing evidence, and what would be seen as a pretty dark moment if Michigan wins and immediately more comes out and it's sort of a bruised eye for college football?
I mean, look, if you're an Ohio State fan,
Yeah.
you're obviously not rooting for Michigan
Yeah.
to win this football game. If you're an Ohio State fan, I would say Michigan not winning and then immediately being sanctioned heavily by the NCAA is the best possible outcome for you.
Right.
So if you feel like, yes, the universe is just, the universe works in mysterious ways, we are still waiting on the official results of whatever investigation the NCAA is doing. We don't know the details of that. A lot has been inferred from what we know publicly. So, yeah, on some level, I totally understand where people would come down on this saying, I want Michigan to win. Why would I want Michigan to win, given everything we know about this program with where they're at? They're a bunch of cheaters.
Right.
I understand that perspective. I'm not even saying that perspective is wrong. I'm just saying the two teams that are out there now, I think Michigan is the more solid product. I think the way they want to run their offense puts them at a distinct advantage here in this game against Washington. And so that's why I'm on 34-27.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. I understand the pick. I'm again going to speak and say I'm going with the quarterback. I'm going with the lethality word. Great. Of Washington's ceiling. And I don't know, man. There is something about Michigan, and it's not just, by the way, Ohio State fans rooting for Washington. It's kind of America. Like, Washington is America's team in this moment, which hurts me to say out loud in American English.
They were the most likable team coming into the 4-team playoff.
Yeah, I agree.
Far and away, because of the Penix factor, because of, I think, all the circumstances surrounding how the other three teams got in, whether or not you believe Florida State would have been at all in contention with Michigan if that were the matchup, that's beside the point. A lot of people rightly feel like Florida State got screwed, like they should have at least had an opportunity to play in this game over in Alabama, over at Texas. Obviously, that did not happen. And so there are a number of college football fans out there who feel like they don't want to root for anybody. They don't want to root for Michigan because of the scandal. They don't want to root for Alabama or Texas because they don't think they should be in with one loss over an undefeated Florida State. Washington, by default, undefeated, fun quarterback, great wide receiving core, fun offense to watch.
Yeah.
It's been a ride if you've watched every Washington game this season, but they're nothing if not likable, at least for somebody like me. I can't speak for you.
How close did you get in your consideration to taking Washington? Or as soon as the games ended last weekend, you're like, Michigan's winning?
I immediately was on Michigan.
Okay.
I immediately was on Michigan. I certainly understand the perspective of Washington. With that being, it feels like we have doubted them for a good chunk of the season, especially as they have played a bunch of close games. And yeah, that part of it definitely factored in. I did consider, am I selling them short? But I know I sold Michigan short in that Alabama game. Granted, Alabama easily could have won.
Yeah.
All right. But Michigan, to me, has been my team all year. And to kind of go away from them in the semifinal was not, in retrospect, something I think I would do again. But
Right.
yeah, hindsight's 2020. I'm on Michigan. I almost reverse engineered my pick backwards from Michigan because I sort of recognized the error of my ways rather quickly.
Okay. I gave immediately. I thought Michigan after last weekend.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is a heart pick because it's definitely not a heart pick. Washington is not my heart. My one of my little brothers went to Washington, so I'm always happy when he's happy, just not when it comes at the expense
Not
of the
when it
Oregon
comes
Ducks.
at the expense of the Oregon Ducks.
But yeah, there is something pixie dust like about this year's charmed Washington season, whether it's against the Oregon in the regular season or in the Pac-12 championship, whether it's, the Arizona game that was back and forth for a good chunk of that game, Wazoo, Oregon State, whatever, the Arizona State weirdness, they just keep getting away with it.
Any consideration from your perspective on what happened last year, where we had a Cinderella, we had a
Sure.
team that nobody expected to be in a different scenario than this year's Washington. All right, it's not apples to apples, but also played in a lot of close games, also had a big play offense that drove them to the championship game, had a defense that at times was suspect in, varying degrees, and got murdered in the championship by Georgia.
Yeah. Yes, there is that consideration. I did not see that TCU team as deep at receiver, and whereas Max Duggan was really good as like a complete effort quarterback, right? Willing his team down the field at times late with his legs, with his arm, whatever. They were not a super advanced downfield passing attack in this way. I also don't think Michigan has the depth of these last couple Georgia teams. They have NFL guys on both sides of the ball. But in terms of how lethal this Michigan team, like I thought the guys on Georgia's offense were so much better than I think they are. I think Michigan's players are good, but I think the Georgia players on offense last year were better. And the waves with which Georgia came at both TCU and the year before anybody that came in front of them, essentially other than Alabama, I think it's a different story. But you're not wrong. But I do think there is something more special physically at quarterback with Washington than there was with Max Duggan and TCU. Purple teams, though. Purple teams in this spot.
Purple teams in this spot. 34-27 Michigan, my national champion. Yours was 33-27 in favor of the Washington Huskies.
Yeah, but is my tone sincere? You may never know.
That is the question. That is the question. Let us know. You know how to find us out on social media. Let us know out at verballers.com. Let us know all across social media what your pick is for this game. And before we let the fine people go, one more time, let's play a little game of Tie versus the World.
Love that.
Time to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to combine three things in which I strongly believe. The first is Michigan minus 4.5. That's the point spread.
You've outlined that. Yep.
Sticking with it. The second is over 56 points. I kind of feel like that's not as popular a pick, especially given how good Michigan's defense is. But flip side, Washington's got a pretty good offense.
True.
Over 56 points. And last but certainly not least, I tried this one the last time I gave a themed parlay. I said Alabama over 20.5 points. They got to exactly 20 and didn't win the football game. We're going to try that again on the Washington side. We're not betting on them to win.
Right.
Washington over 20.5 points. Michigan minus the 4.5, over 56 points. Washington over 20.5 points.
Okay.
We need a name for this bet. We got one more to make it count, Dan.
Okay, so they play in the '93 Rose Bowl with national championship hopes on the line. something stallion. Some.
We could call it the Wild Stallion Parlay.
Could call it something like that. You could do. There's something in Houston where the game is.
Houston, we have a parlay.
Houston, we have a Harbaugh.
Yeah.
Houston, we have a parlay. I don't mind. Picking Penix parlay, but that's more like you're selecting. No.
Let's go with Houston. We have a parlay.
Houston, we have a parlay.
Houston, we have a parlay. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use the code SOLID. New customers can get $150 instantly in bonus bets for betting just $5. Plus, score an NBA League Pass, Dan, on us. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with the code SOLID. The crown is yours. It's been fun having you here, man.
It's been great.
It's great to finally have you here in studio with me. All too often, I'm looking at you through a little screen. So to have you next to me to pick the biggest game of the year, it's been fun. Hopefully, we've thought out from Goodman Stadium. Hopefully, Yakos is not still in the system. Hopefully, everybody out there enjoyed it as well. For myself, Ty Hillenbrandt, for that guy, Dan Rubenstein, thanks again. Enjoy the game, and as always, stay solid.
Peace.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY at 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, 21 plus age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See dkng.co/football for eligibility, terms, and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply.
Okay. Great. God, I gotta get some Advil in me.